I did extensive testing on the new Creaking Mob, and this is what I found. Hello there, Ray here. Leave a like as it really helps out, and enjoy the video. Now the Creaking does act like an armor stand where you can use it to have the sweeping attack transfer over from it to nearby mobs. Now even though they're frozen, if you drop a boat on them, it doesn't actually just sit on top of them, but instead goes through them and then they just push it. And if it has blocks in its head, it does not take damage. Now if we try to do entity cramming with a whole bunch of minecarts, you see they're not taking any damage. And even if we look away, they don't take damage. Now even with a whole bunch of them in a single area, they don't seem like they do entity cramming to the nearby mobs like the zombie. But if you look away from these guys, then all of a sudden they start doing entity cramming to the zombies inside and will actually kill them. Now despite them being frozen in place, they can be moved with liquids like water and even lava, although they don't take any damage from it. You could also push them using pistons. And I found out you can actually catch them in minecarts if you turn away from them and let them walk into the minecart. Only then will they actually get picked up by it. But even as passengers, when the chunks get unloaded, the next time they are loaded, they will be removed from the minecarts, and then they will spawn in some new ones nearby where their Creaking Heart is. And even if they're name tagged or in a minecart, as soon as daytime comes, they will just vanish. But while it's in a minecart, it can teleport into other dimensions. But once it comes over here, it immediately vanishes because it's too far away from its heart. Even if the coordinates are the same from the overworld to the nether, it will still immediately vanish. Now the player can't actually damage the Creaking, but if we give it an enemy such as Iron Golem, who will automatically attack hostile mobs, you can see it can hit it and bounce it around, but it can't do any damage to it. Now the Warden will also try to attack it. Even when the Warden gets mad at it, it tries to hit it, but it's not able to do any damage to it. Now Zoglins are also things that automatically attack stuff. You can see it is attacking it, and it can push it around a little bit. But once again, it does no damage. It's almost like pushing like an armor stand. It's actually kind of funny. And Withers automatically attack mobs as well. And you can see it tries to hit it and actually gives it the wither effect, but it can't do any damage to it. Even when it walks, it doesn't actually take any damage from the wither effect. And if we give a Vindicator the Johnny name tag, you can see it is mad, but if we let the Johnny out, it actually seems like it's really afraid of these guys and it runs away from them. It's actually quite strange. There might be some lore behind it where the Illagers are afraid of these tree spirits. And putting this to the test, you can see the Pillagers run away from these guys. Here's a Evoker. They actually run really fast away from them. There's a Vindicator. Here's a Vex. Vex don't really seem to care. A Ravager also seems to run away. And even Illusioners, which aren't in the survival game, are still considered Illagers and seem to be really afraid of this guy. Now this could be helpful in raid farms, although these guys currently vanish when they are unloaded. Now the Creaking Mob is a hostile mob. So if I pull up the F3 and if you look right here where it says M and this is about 35, if I add more Creakings, this number will go higher, meaning that they are hostile mobs and they count to the hostile mob count. So if you have 70 of them in an area, it will prevent any other hostile mobs from spawning in your world, making a peaceful mob switch. But because they despawn when they're unloaded, they aren't very ideal compared to the different types of hostile mob switches that I've shown in the past. So I made a super flat world that has saplings on the ground, and then I turned up the tick sprint. You can see all of them growing on their own. It's really cool to actually see. And then if we check all of these trees by trying to replace any Creaking Hearts with a different block, you can see that none of them actually got replaced. This means that there is no Creaking Hearts that generate with normal trees that are planted and only come into the game with already pre-generated trees that are in the special Pale Garden biomes. This means when it comes to actual Creaking Hearts, they're actually a non-renewable resource. Now leaf color also changes in this biome. The outside edges are the Pale Garden, where the inside is the jungle biome. You can see something like birch doesn't change its color, but a lot of the other types of the leaves actually do change their colors when they go into this biome. A similar thing happens to water. This is water in the jungle, and then this is water in a Pale Gardens. It lacks a lot of its color. Now the rest of the tree is flammable, but when it comes to the heart, it is not flammable. And unlike other wood, when it comes to the Creaking Heart, it cannot be used for fuel in the furnace. Now the Creaking Heart only activates if there is one of the pale logs on either side of it, but also works for the stripped variation as well as the wood variations, but doesn't work for the stripped wood variations or different types of logs. And as long as the Creaking Heart is in line with the wood, then it will be activated, but if you turn it a different direction, then it will not. So if we bring the blocks over into the nether dimension, it does activate, but it doesn't spawn in any creaking mob. And even over here in the end dimension, it also activates, but it doesn't spawn in the mob. Now the data inside of the creaking heart as well as the actual creaking mob isn't that interesting. The creaking will only spawn on top of full squared blocks, but it won't spawn on something like leaves, but if we come in with some glass here, it will spawn on it. And since it vanishes once daytime comes, it's not that useful in a lot of areas. And the creaking heart will summon the creak once the player gets within under 32 blocks of the actual creaking heart. And if you go greater than 4 chunks away from the creaking, it will despawn. And the creaking will only chase the player 32 blocks away from its initial creaking heart. So the heart's way over there, and you can see even though I turn my back, it can't actually come over here and get to me. And this is a circle around it, so even if I walk over here, it can't get to me. And if you would move the creaking beyond this 32 meter area, then it would immediately vanish. But if you get out of their aggro range, and then you actually walk backwards, as long as you're not looking at them, you can walk right up to them without them attacking you. Now, Ofakin looked into the Minecraft code, and he actually figured out how the creaking detects with the player looking at him. So essentially, if the player is turned greater than 60 degrees from either its head, torso, or feet, then the creaking considers this as the player not actually looking at him, and it'll start moving towards them. This is why increasing FOV or going into F5 does not actually stop the creaking from attacking you. But if you give them a name tag, and even if you go 64 blocks away from them, they will not despawn. But if you unload the chunks, when you log back in, they will be removed. Now the creaking heart can be used as wireless redstone, so if I activate this here, the change from it turning off to turning on is something that observers can read. Right now I'm just having it run the redstone signal into this command block, which will say creaking in the chat. But you can have this hooked up to any type of redstone mechanic. Now if I go ahead and turn it off, it's not going to turn off because there is currently a creaking in the area. And even if he despawns, it won't actually update the actual creaking heart. Once it's completely unloaded, now if I would hop across this chunk border right here, as soon as I hopped across the chunk, all of a sudden it loaded the creaking heart and that activated the redstone. This is based on your simulation distance. The lower this is, the closer you have to be before it will activate, and the higher it is, the farther you can be before you can activate it. And I can easily update my moss farm into a pale moss farm just by switching out this block here with the new pale moss block. Now when the machine will come in and bone mill it, instead of placing in moss for the stone, it will place in the pale moss. And you can also see we're going to get the new carpets, the pale moss carpets. And if you want to build up this design, I do have a tutorial video here. If you are trying to get the actual bone mill, I would recommend still using the normal moss version. That's because the normal moss will produce azaleas along with other things that the pale moss produces, such as like grass and carpet. And since it produces that extra azaleas, those will produce a little bit extra bone meal when you compost these down. So I'm actually sending all this loot over here, down this water stream here, and into a bunch of composters. And this new pale stuff will compost down just like the other moss stuff. Besides that, with the old moss farm, you can also get the azaleas, which is actually a fuel source, and you can sort those off using a auto sorter, and then use those in a furnace to get infinite fuel. And then with the infinite fuel, you can actually get infinite XP farm on demand, which is really nice. Now, unlike moss, which is not flammable, I suppose because it's like so wet and moist, when it comes to the pale moss, it can actually be set on fire. And this is a good way to see if it's flammable. Normally clicking on other blocks just won't place flames. You can actually place flames on the stuff, and we can actually watch it burn up. This does kind of make sense with the whole pale moss being really dry, similar to like Spanish moss. Now, even though it is flammable, it doesn't actually work in a furnace as fuel. I also made a pale hanging moss farm by converting my weeping vine farm just by changing out some blocks. I went over here and placed in the pale hanging moss from the top, and it does need to be bone meal. It doesn't grow down naturally. Then we have a piston that will break it off after a short delay, and then we also have a little observer clock here. So when I retracted this piston here, it makes a clock which powers this block here, dispensing bone meal onto the moss, which grows it downwards. And then it's also getting bud power, this piston over here, which is getting updated by the snow block. And then the piston extends for a brief moment, breaking it off. You can see all the items are going downwards and getting automatically collected by the hoppers here and put into the chest. So you can get as many pale hanging moss as you want. Although it's a little bit expensive just because for one bone meal you only get one of the moss. And the hanging moss is also flammable. And you can compost it if you want to, although it's fairly weak. Now the hanging moss cannot be climbed up like vines. Share this video with your favorite Minecrafter, and now check out this playlist on other crazy glitches that I found, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye!